Welcome to this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Laduna Humphrey, an award winning writer, podcaster, an investigative journalist, and an advocate for victims of crime. Welcome to the show, Laduna.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
You are welcome, and you are welcome to India. And it's a very good, morning here with lots of rain, lots of thunderstorm, but the spirit is very much, cheerful and alive. And amidst all these things, we'll be talking about with you, Ladona, about private investigation, how exactly this business of private investigation works down there in the US, especially at Arkansas. But first, to understand from you, Ladona, is that, in today's time, you do a lot of work. You are a private investigator, you are an author. But what I see in some of the profiles is that you are raising money for people in terms of, some family who lost their house was impacted by fire. So you are
Yes.
raising funds for them. On another aspect, you are fighting, you are looking at Melissa Witt's case. You are looking, trying to gather information in terms of any information about this crime that has happened, and at the same time you do so many other work. So what exactly does a private investigator do in today's time? I wanted to understand through the type of work you do in the in that backdrop. Exactly.
So in the United States, there's all different requirements for a private investigator within each state. And so in my state, I had to meet the requirements here. And there are all different kinds of private investigators. And I primarily work in two areas. One is missing persons or cold cases. And so that's just cases in the United States. And it doesn't even have to be the United States, but typically it is. It's just cases that have not been solved, missing, long term missing cases, or murdered cases. And then we also work with quite a bit of insurance fraud investigation. Every now and then we will get a request for, oh, I wonder if my husband is cheating or my wife is cheating, and we don't take those kind of cases. We want to take really serious cases where we're going to help the community, and that's either by helping a family solve the puzzle of where their missing loved one is, or helping a company recoup money from maybe fraudulent Medicaid fraud. Maybe it's identity theft, those kind of things. So those are the two big areas that I focus on.
Right. So, in your case in the US, do you need to have specifically some special education, some certification, or is it much more on the, that you learn on the job? How does it work? What it takes to be a private investigator?
In my state and in every state, you have to be certified. And so each state has different requirements. But for me personally, I had to take a test. So there was a lot of studying. I studied for about 3 months. And I already had a little bit of a background in terms of working missing persons cases as an advocate. And I'd been doing that for about 20 years. And so I had already built those relationships and knew how to do those things. But it required me to get my certification. I was required here in the state to take a test. I had to get at least an 80% on that test, and then I was able to be certified. And then after that, I do ongoing training and ethics classes, investigative techniques, and I'm required to put so many hours in each year, and that helps me maintain my license. But in the United States, I feel like they do a really good job of policing private investigators. They want people that really understand how to investigate and how to do it ethically, and I think that's really important. So yeah, there's a lot of rules around it.
Right. Uh, why do people need a private investigator? What I want to ask at this with this question, Ladona, is that in the backdrop of uh, a lot of cases, just the very recent one that somebody died in the US, and there is a lot of discussion about, if I remember the name, Nichols, or if I the black guy who was murdered, if I may
Yes.
use the right word, and there is a lot of discussion on that. Now, whatever be the wider the reason behind, or what that case is, the wider thing is it that more private investigators are required because police is not able to handle the number of cases, or is it that police is not doing the policing part, the law enforcement part that it needs to do? Whatever the reason for that, but is it because that now law enforcement has to be done much more on the private side and not from the government side or from the state side? How do you look at this particular thing?
I think it's going to vary from city to city and case to case. But I think overall, what you see, a private investigator is often needed when a police department is just overworked. They have too many cases, or maybe they don't have enough resources to be able to properly investigate a case, or perhaps, and what I see mostly are the cases that I get are cases that are 10, 15, and 20 years old. And they just don't have the wherewithal to continue to put the time and energy that's needed into the case. And a lot of times that law enforcement, they're not required to share everything with the family that they find out. There's a lot of reasons for that. They're good reasons. But sometimes the family wants to have more hands on, especially if the case has been long term. And that's when they'll turn to a private investigator. That's when they'll call someone like me and say, hey, can you help me with this? And that's where we try to, from our company standpoint, we get involved, but we try to work alongside law enforcement, not against them, but with them, and cooperate in each other's case. And typically that works. I mean, we work with a lot of law enforcement agencies, and really we just want to be an extra support to them, just extra eyes, extra ears, all those things, and feet on the ground. So that's typically it. But there are some cases that law enforcement, for whatever reason, didn't investigate properly. Maybe they didn't have the right tools. Maybe they didn't have, the right motives. That does happen. Not all investigators are perfect or ethical. And so we do see some of that. It's rare that we've been involved in those kind of cases, but that's really it. It's just the families need answers. And if they've been waiting for 2 decades, they really want to get somebody whose primary job is to work on that case, and they don't have 50 other cases that they're distracted with.
Okay. Why did you become a private investigator? And very quick question along with, is it like a private detective? Both are the same things, or there is a bit of a difference in both?
Nope, that's the same. It's just two different names for the same thing.
Okay.
I really decided that for me to become a private investigator was really important. I'd been doing advocacy work for 2 decades. I've been really involved in the case of a missing and murdered. She went missing and then she was found murdered. 19-year-old girl from 1994. Her name was Melissa Witt. And I've worked that case for about 8 years. About 6 years in, I decided, you know what? I think I can contribute more if I am able to get my private eye license. And that's what I did. And so it's been a good thing. I think it's contributed a lot to the case, and it was important to me personally. At least in my state, it gives me a little bit more credibility when I'm questioning people. It gives me the ability to work closer with law enforcement if they choose to share case files with me and other information. And it just gives me a little bit extra oomph, behind my name to be able to say, hey, I've got this certification. I've been doing this for a long time. I'm I'm trying to help. And most people are willing to cooperate that way.
Okay. Now, let's look at it from that point. Is it difficult to work being a woman, or is it an advantage at certain places being a woman to get more information? And secondly, how is the relationship with the police department? Because what you do is in a way going to help them, but at the same time it's going to expose that their earlier colleagues did not do their work properly, and it will, the press will highlight the inefficiency or deficiencies of the law enforcement agencies. So how does it work? How do what do you have to share on this?
Okay, those are some big questions you asked me. So I'm going to try to tackle those one at a time. As far as being a woman in this field, it can be difficult. It's primarily a man's field, or it had been for a very, very long time. And so, um, the way I approach those situations is just very respectfully. I kind of know by now which people in my area are going to want to work with me, and who may have some hesitation, and it really just depends on your work. But I've been really blessed to work with some really great people who have accepted that difference, that I am a woman. And so I don't really feel like it's been a hindrance. In terms of your next question, what is that like? A private investigator gets involved, and does that make the police feel uncomfortable? And I think that comes down to my approach. And I really do approach a situation where I'm trying to work alongside investigators, and I try to build a great relationship. And in terms of the Melissa Witt case, we work side by side with investigators, and it's been really great for us because I'm not going in trying to poke holes in their story, but I am trying to get to the facts, and we do that together. And I've been involved with cases where I have found that the police department had made some mistakes. But instead of waving that flag from the rooftops, I go with them, and I say, hey, explain this to me. Why was this mistake made? How can we fix it? Let's get back in, and let's re-examine this. So I think it all comes down to your approach. And I try to remain very professional, and very supportive of law enforcement. Their job is really, really hard to do, because in addition to investigating these cold cases, they're dealing with regular crime every single day. They have a really, really difficult job. And so I try to keep that in mind and just keep the best foot forward. Fortunately, I've not ran into a situation where I've had to reveal that there's been a corrupt police department or something like that has happened. I know those situations exist. I just haven't come across them yet.
Right, right. And is private investigation a lucrative work, or something to get into? What would you like to tell the new people who look at such things and very exciting, but don't know about the money part here? Is it lucrative enough, or is it much more very hard work and less output in terms of money?
I mean, it you get what you put in it. And so our company does well. We this is what we're doing full time, and so that's exciting. And that's I don't spend my full time being a PI, but my boss does. And I think it's worth it, but it's like anything else in life. It's going to be as successful as the energy that you put into it. I will say it's really tough to get a PI investigation agency off the ground. It really is. It's tough. And so you really want to make sure that you're jumping in with maybe somebody who's already seasoned. I work with a company with, my boss, she is retired law enforcement. And so, we have a little bit of an advantage there. And so I think it really just depends. I definitely think that if it's your dream to become a PI, that you should follow it, because there's a huge need for them in the United States and across the world. There really are. But you have to stay really focused, understand your market and what people need in your area, do some research and find out what people are hiring for and how you can get involved. And no, we don't charge for every missing persons case that we work. So some of that we do for free, but we do charge for, Medicaid fraud cases, identity theft, those sorts of cases. We do charge for those. And unfortunately, we live in a society where that stuff's pretty common now. So I would say, yes, it's well spent time, and I'm able to give back and help people, and it's worth it.
Right, right. Now, when I hear, let me understand from you. When somebody hires you, when it's a police case, people go deal with the police. You come out of the police station, and there is a certain degree of distance between the police and the families or individuals. Formality is there. But when somebody hires anyone as a private detective or an investigator, there is,
Mhm.
a lot of meetings, and some sort of better understanding develops. On the police side, it's a bit of cold sort of a outlook. Not everybody, because there is not much of a time for that. Here, because the family is paying money, they try to understand things in a better manner, and you also try to help them get those answers. Amidst all these things, sometimes you tend to almost move towards being an activist,
Right.
almost like that. Now, how do you see that? Is that a good idea? Does it work for everybody? You do a lot of help beyond the general private investigation work, if I understand correctly, and that is very good to see. But as an individual, as a work, as a business, how do you see it? What would you ask others to look at this whole concept of private investigation, bordering activism?
I think that the advocacy portion isn't for everybody because that's definitely not going to be profitable. That's really just what your soul wants to do to give back, right? And so I think it's important that a private investigator have empathy and have some degree of advocacy with them so they can help these families. And mainly, I think that because you're not going to get an answer in every case. You can hire the best private investigator, but some of these missing and murdered cases, you're just not going to get a resolution to. And I'm really honest with the families up front. We take a look at it and we let them know. But I think maybe putting resources in their hands so they can help themselves to a degree, not get closure, but maybe kind of work through the pain and maybe continue to advocate for themselves. So I try to put that into people's hands. And I think a private investigator has to do that to some degree. I've taken it to a much larger degree, especially like with the Melissa Witt case. And so I don't know that I would necessarily say it's a bad thing. I just wouldn't recommend it if you're trying to build a business. But once you've decided that this is what you want to do and you want to do this no matter what your paycheck is, right? Because your heart says this is my dream. Then I would seriously tell people, part of the investigative work is advocacy because we're just helping people. That's what this comes down to, is that we're helping people. And I think that's very important, especially in these cases where they've lost a loved one. I mean, that's just like the worst thing that a family can go through. It's this ambiguous loss of, where's my missing loved one? Or, my loved one was murdered and I don't have answers. And so I think a person that's drawn to this kind of work is probably going to naturally have that empathy and that desire to advocate. But it's all going to come down to, let's keep the business growing. I can't always do advocacy work, and try to keep it balanced. I try to keep it balanced.
Try to keep it balanced. Tell us about the Melissa Witt's case. I did see that page that down there, but I could not fully understand exactly what it was all about. And where is it now? Is it solved? Is it open? What exactly is this? Because missing persons is a reality in today's world everywhere. But they
Right.
must be found. They need to be found because they are part of us.
Yeah, they're right. Well, Melissa she was kidnapped. She went missing in December of 1994 from Fort Smith, Arkansas. And investigators found her body 6 weeks later in the Ozark National Forest. She had been murdered. She'd been strangled to death. She was only 19 years old. And so here we are, 28 years later. Her case is still not solved. And so for the past 8 years, I've been advocating for Melissa, acting as her voice, poring over police records, re-interviewing people, and I've even written a couple of books. I have put together a documentary, everything that I can to bring awareness to her case. And in my career over the past 20 years, I've worked hundreds of missing persons cases, hundreds of cases of victims that were murdered, but there's just something different about Melissa Witt's case. I don't know if it's because she was so close to my age. I was 21 when I remember watching this on the news. She was 19. It's just about an hour away from my house. We had friends in common. There's just something about this case that's just captured me, and I'm not going to give up until I get her justice. I believe that justice is a real thing that people deserve. And I would like to see that happen. And her mother, her late mother, who's now deceased, really wanted to know who murdered her daughter. And I feel like the world needs to know who it is. And I think we're closer every single day. And this will be a case that I will continue to advocate for until we have a resolution.
Right, until you have a resolution. Resolution must be there. In terms of, I don't know, how does these things work? These sort of cases, in I also have read about them. Suddenly, especially girls, some girl has been found dead in some park, in some forest. Her body has been found missing. Who does these sort of things? Is it, are these random crimes? What is, just want to understand, what have you understood out of all these years of understanding these cases, investigation? Who does this crime? Because as they say, crime never pays, then the criminal will always leave some trace. What happens about that? Why doesn't it happen in these cases when there is also so much of public pressure, and the police is also trying to find out why are those, hardened criminals, they get caught, but in such cases, such random cases, if we may say so, they never get uncovered? Why is it so? What is your understanding?
The typically when someone is murdered, it's somebody close to them. It's somebody in their family, it's somebody that they dated, it's somebody that they were married to. Uh, you know, 8 times out of 10 that's the case. It's somebody that was close to them. But then you come across these cases that it's different. You see people who are serial killers. We've ran across serial killers. You see people that just commit these random acts of violence because maybe they were mentally ill or unstable, or they have some kind of childhood trauma. But I would say by and large, you're seeing these victims who are murdered by somebody they knew. And a lot of times you don't see closure in those cases that are like from the 90s, kind of before the rise of DNA, right? Before we had the proper kind of techniques to even collect DNA. So you've got to go back and reinvestigate and relook at evidence that might have DNA. It comes down to the DNA evidence, really, in these cases. I feel like it does. And there's so many cases from the 90s and before that. And we're seeing those cases be solved by newer technology today, but it's getting that technology to the police departments. It's getting advocates involved to say, hey, let's get information together on this case. It's getting the information to the family so they can come forward and put pressure on law enforcement or government agencies to you know rush the information, push past these backlogs that they've got, because there's so many backlogs across the United States of these labs who are waiting to test evidence in these cases that are cold cases. And so it's just the wheels of justice are very, very slow. And it'll be harder and harder and harder to commit these kind of crimes the more advanced our technology is, and we're already seeing that. It makes it harder because, like you mentioned something earlier, you've got these criminals that are being caught. Well, with these colder cases, they're a lot more complicated. And technology has changed so much since then. Some of these cases in the 90s, we didn't have cell phones that we could track. We didn't have access to the kind of GPS information that we have now when somebody goes missing. And so it's just a difference of how we've evolved, in the United States and through the world. And it's just trying to get that information and those techniques caught up with these cases that are so old. And that's what it's going to come down to, especially in the Witt case. It's going to come down to newer technology.
So what is it that motivates you? Is it your conviction, or is it about the, waiting for some new technology or something that can work in this case? It will work, as I can certainly tell with the amount of conviction I can see in your voice, in your face on this case.
So yeah, it's going to come down to that. It's going to come down to somebody like me that continues to push forward and say, I'm not going to stop until there's an answer in this case. Have we tried this? Have you tried this? Let's do this. And so that's really what my role has been in this case. I meet with retired investigators and current investigators pretty much every month. And we talk about, have we re-interviewed these people? Have we looked at this? Can we test this? Can we send this back off to the lab? And so there needs to be a champion often in these cases. And in this instance, I am Melissa Witt's champion. And we're so close. I really believe we're going to see her case solved this year. I mean, we are so close. And I'm going to just keep pushing forward. And, I think I mentioned I've written 2 books. I've got another book coming out this year about the Witt case. And I will continue to do everything I can in my power until we can say we finally solved the case.
Right, right. A
We
lot
do
of,
it.
a lot of these true crime stories and podcasts have come up and they are doing quite well. This genre is doing quite well.
Yeah.
And several cases I have read, I don't talk much about true crime, but several cases I have seen that have gotten solved, old cases, through taking up in their, people taking it in their podcast. So that's a nice thing to see developing or happening. You too have a podcast, Ladonna, Deep Dark Secrets podcast. Is it about true crime? What is it about? And have you talked about the Melissa Witt case in this podcast too?
We have. And so the Deep Dark Secrets podcast was really born out of a tip that came in the Witt case. And so I wrote a book about it. It's called Strangled. And then Alicia Lockhart, who's my co-host, we decided that we were going to launch the Deep Dark Secrets podcast. And it covers the fringes of true crime. So we're not talking about the Witt case this entire season. We've mentioned her several times, but we're really talking about some online communities that are very dangerous that contribute to the murder of women across the world. And we think that's very, very important. And so we definitely want people to tune in all over the world. Right now, we've got close to 10,000 downloads on our podcast since September, which is pretty exciting. And we're just going to keep moving forward with that. So, our first season started in September and it'll run through September. So, it's a year-long season. But we do want people to tune in because they're going to hear about things that they didn't know existed on the internet that's dangerous. And it's a danger to women.
Right, right. And you have also you are the co-founder of the All Lost Girls. What is this particular, uh, you know, your company about?
So, All the Lost Girls is a nonprofit organization. It was founded in honor of Melissa Witt. And we are a team of investigators that are on this board of directors for this agency. And we focus on strangulation cold cases in the United States. So, cases, it's a really interesting, unique niche. There are thousands of cases of young women that have been strangled. Their cases aren't solved. It's a lot like Melissa Witt's case. And so that's what we focus on. We do fundraising so we can pay for DNA testing and everything that's needed to maybe bring some closure to that case. We also spotlight that case on our website. We do a lot of media activity, and we have a lot of people on that board of directors that they have a powerful punch. Maybe they have their own podcast, or maybe they film documentaries, or maybe they're an attorney. Just a great group of people who are very, very passionate about seeing these cases solved. And it's really important to me that we have this agency because it was born out of the work on the Melissa Witt case, and because I've come across so many cases that are like hers, I wanted to ensure that there would always be an advocate, a voice for these young women who's going to say no, no, we're going to do what we have to do. So that's what All the Lost Girls is.
Right, right. What would you, with so much of experience of these cases, and in today's world, it has become even more difficult, dangerous in terms of online, offline, and so many apps coming up for dating and all. What would you like to tell a lot of young women, who are meeting, no harm in meeting people, but what should they take care of? How should they keep themselves much more protected? Because anything, these things sort of things are rising by the day. What is your advice to the young women all across the globe?
I'm glad you asked me that because I love to be able to share that information. And the internet's a scary place where it's a scary world because you know what? You could be talking to anybody and they could be pretending to be anybody. And so I tell young women every single day, you know, verify who you're talking to. Don't give out personal information. Be careful about the pictures that you post. Be careful about the information you share. And you know what? Technology is great, but if you want to meet people, shut the laptop, shut the cell phone off, and meet somebody down in your own community. Meet them at the local church. Meet them at Walmart if you want to. Meet them at activities. Be very, very careful about what you do online, because there are so many people out there, and we talk about this in our podcast, every week, that are online that are looking for victims. And so we really, really encourage young women to be very, very careful about what information they give out about themselves, because it just takes a little bit of information for a predator to track you down. And so we warn women against apps like Tinder and these dating apps. Don't use those apps. That's a dangerous breeding ground. I know that there are people that have had good experiences, but there's so many more people who've had terrible experiences. It's dangerous. And so, if it looks too good to be true, it probably is. And you got to remember that. But I would always verify who I'm talking to. I'll close up this part by saying, I've talked to young women who have talked for months online to people that they think they're talking to a young man, and it turns out that's not who it is at all. It's a 60-year-old predator. And we just try to give them tips on, you know, use FaceTime so you can really talk to somebody. Really encourage that live interaction, not just behind a keyboard. That's the stuff that gets you in trouble.
Right, right. And especially if they are going out, if there is, and even if you know the person, because you said a lot of times it is the people you know, and many a times they are the ones who might be the perpetuator. So
Yeah.
a lot of people, when you know or even date, what is it that you must take care when you are going out with them? Uh, so that
You know,
something they cannot just nothing bad happens and nobody comes to know about it.
I think my best advice to that is if you go out with somebody and they have any kind of indication that they're violent or controlling or cruel in any way, you just stop right there. They don't get a second chance. You go ahead and leave. You don't go with them. You don't go anywhere else, because it's that violent behavior, that controlling behavior, that cruel behavior that can lead to something even more. Maybe murder wasn't on their mind, but it escalates to something like that. And so I also tell young men, women, and young men, don't go and meet people off of these dating apps or off the internet. Don't go meet them in person. That's probably not who you're really going to meet anyway, right? 9 times out of 10, it's not. And that's just too dangerous. And so I encourage people to go out in groups together. I encourage people to do a lot of FaceTime talking so they really know who they're talking to before they ever go to that location. And then always tell people where you're at. Make sure people know what if you're going to do it anyway and you're going to go meet somebody, make sure that friends know who you're meeting, where you're meeting, and what time. That's really, really important. It's just, for me, I have 7 kids, 5 of them are daughters. And it scares me to death to think that we live in a world where they could be lured by some kind of online predator. So these are things that I teach my own kids, and I keep pretty good account of where they are at all times, even my adult daughter. So, it's always better to share information with people. Don't keep it a secret. That's what's going to keep you safe. Secrets kill you. That's what I tell my kids all the time.
Right, but a lot of kids also want independence. So and parents struggle with that. So what would you like to tell them, to tell their kids that they are not intrusive but actually they are trying to protect them? Is there a way to convey this in a better manner,
I think,
Khudania?
for me, what I personally do is I have conversations with my kids, right? I don't necessarily like everything they're going to do, but I've also built relationships with my children where they can trust me and we talk about things. And I've talked to them about the importance of, you know, sharing that information and being open, because if a person is worth meeting online, then you should be able to talk to your family about it. It shouldn't be a secret. I don't always have to agree with what their choices are going to be, but it is my job to keep them safe. And for me, that open communication works. It's not too intrusive. For my younger kids, the ones that have cell phones, I keep a GPS app on their phone and I know where they're at all times. For my older kids who don't really kind of want that, if they're over 18, then there's less I can do about that. But I've built a really good rapport with them, and I've been doing this kind of work for a long, long time. And so my kids are more, hyper aware of what happens in the world than I think a lot of kids are. But I think that's up to parents to be honest with their kids and say, this is why I want you to be safe. Let me tell you about what happened to this girl. Let's talk about that. And you can tell that to your children in age appropriate ways. So you're not terrifying them, but so they understand that the world is not always a good place and you have to take precautions to be safe. And I think it's all about that, teaching them to be safe and give them the freedom to do what they're going to do, but give them the tools that they need to be safe. And if they use them, they're going to be okay. And that's the approach I take. And I teach a lot of elementary school kids over the years these same techniques. It's important, And one of the other things that I share is that, we tell kids you can keep a surprise, but you can't keep a secret, right? So if an adult wants you to keep a surprise party for your aunt, a secret, shh, don't tell, that's okay. But if they ask you to keep it a secret, adults don't need a kid to keep a secret. And we really approach it that way, keep surprises, not secrets. And that can protect a kid in the very end if they're not keeping secrets about what's going on in their life. And so that's just something I've done since my kids were little, and it's worked so far. So, and I hope
Right.
it keeps working. I want my kids to stay safe. So,
Yeah. People, not the whole world should be safe, and especially young children should be as safe, because that's the time then they are growing up and they are learning about things they actually do not know what our world has actually turned into. Lot
yes.
of dangers and dangerous people lurking around in our lives, in our neighborhood. We got to be safe. Now a lot
Right.
of people who would want to connect with you, uh I don't know how do they do that. People who have got something to share, something to ask, even engage you as a private investigator, or even to, just know more about it, more about the Melissa Witt's case, about other things.
There's two ways to find me. You can find me on social media. You just type in my name on Instagram or Facebook. I'm pretty easy to find. But I also have a website, ladonnahumphrey.com. I answer every email that comes through. So you can email me there, or you can go to deepdarksecretspodcast.com. And I answer all the emails that come through there. So I'm pretty easy to find. You can find me on whokilledmissywitt.com. I answer all those emails too. So either one of those three websites are a good way to reach me, and I can talk people through the finer points of private investigation. We can talk about cold cases, we can talk about the podcast. My goal in life is to help people, and if that is by imparting information to them, then I would be glad to do that. And I probably answer 100 emails a day, so I welcome them. Like I said, I really want to be able to share the information so I can help people.
Right. Right. My last question to you is, you do so much of work, answers hundreds of emails, so many roles to play as a writer, podcaster, documentarian, investigative journalist, private investigator, advocate of victims of crime. It's a very busy life. How, and you are a passionate person in whatever you do, in terms of finding out even about the Melissa Witt's case. It's not an easy thing to do. How do you then detach yourself with the work, because you have got your family, a big family to take care of, and especially daughters, they can keep you busy a lot of times. So how do you detach yourself from this thing when you are so passionate about the causes that you work for, and live your life? How do you manage that? Because that a lot women can do that. A lot of people would want to understand that for better for themselves. And second part is that, doing so much of work, where is it now that you want to go from here? What more is there to achieve as an individual?
Wow, those are big questions. I would say, first and foremost, my job in life, first and foremost, is to be a wife to my husband and a mother to my kids. So that comes first. They come first. And I do a lot of work outside of that, like you mentioned. And so I'm very intentional with my time. I take my kids to school every day. I pick them up every day. I make sure that I'm cooking dinner. I take time away. I unplug from the phone, from the computer. That stuff will wait. Kids don't keep. I don't know if you've heard that that saying before, but they don't. They grow up. And so I try to be intentional and spend time with my kids and with my husband, and with my family. And they're very supportive of the work I do. And that's helpful too. And so I just have to take the time and say, I'm going to walk away. I'm not going to work on this today. I have to put this away for today. And that really helps me keep my mental health, good. It helps me relax. It helps me with my bond with my family. And so I really encourage that. Everybody needs to take some time away. As far as what is next for me, I had somebody ask me that question yesterday, and it's so difficult for me. I have 4 books coming out this year, and I think for me, it's just my next step will be probably taking my advocacy on a larger scale. And so that's some things that I'm working on behind the scenes, and maybe be able to train people up to do what I'm doing. And so there's more of me, because I can't do this forever. My life is finite. But I would like to be able to impart this knowledge to other people so they can be passionate and do the same thing. So I think that you could probably watch for that. There's some things that are in the works for this next year that are going to be pretty exciting. I'm excited about it.
Wonderful. On this note, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much, Indy, for joining us.
Thank you.